Hello, I think we're live. I'm going to wait a few minutes here to see how many participants we get. So please bear with me.
Hi, everyone. We have people joining in, people entering the chat.
Great. A few minutes. We'll just give a few minutes. Numbers are going up. Morgan, give a wave. Nice to see people signing in on a Friday evening.
Yeah, hard on Friday. Of course, where are they going to go?
True.
But online.
I see Teresa just signed in. She's one of our faculty.
Hi, Teresa. Glad you're here tonight.
Caitlin Sweetland.
All right, our numbers seem pretty steady. Maybe we should get started.
I'm ready.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make a few introductions here. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2020 Sculpture X Symposium Art and Agency. My name is Thomas Como. I teach sculpture at Slippery Rock University, and I will be introducing Morgan Pewitt, who will be discussing various aspects of her work, including a conversation on Mildred's Lane. Joining me tonight is Mary Elizabeth Meyer from Edinburgh University, where she facilitates that institution's art education program. Mary Elizabeth, say hi.
Hi, everyone.
Great. So I'm glad to see people attending here. I would like to thank you for joining us. This symposium was originally planned as an in-person conference to be held in Pittsburgh prior to the COVID. And I would like to acknowledge the entities involved in transitioning to this webinar format, and in doing so, allowing for this dialogue of diverse issues and interaction to happen. And just how important it is to keep this conversation happening. So Grace Chin from the Sculpture Center in Cleveland, Lisa Austin from Civitas and Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania, Delaney Jenkins of University of Pittsburgh, James Laux, Chatham University in Pittsburgh, and Patty Beachley, Seton Hill University of Greensburg, PA. We're all involved in developing this conference. And I would also like to thank the institutions that contributed financially to support this event and making it possible to bring this program to everyone. Some quick items here to mention. Today's presentation will be recorded and then posted to the Sculpture X website. There will be both Q&A feature and chat feature in this webinar, and we will address questions as time allows. I would like to remind you that sessions tomorrow, and I will repeat this at the end, sessions tomorrow start at 10 o'clock with a planning session hosted by Patty Beachley, Gendered Spaces at 2 o'clock, Art and Agency at 4 o'clock, and then closing remarks at 5:30. So, to introduce Morgan Pewitt. One thing Morgan has done to describe her philosophy or way of actively engaging life is that she has created her own vocabulary. So Morgan refers to Mildred's Lane complex as a complexity. And I kind of think that that term could be used to describe Morgan herself. She is an interdisciplinary artist, working in installation art, design, architecture, landscape, and film, rearranging intersections by applying conceptual tools. Pewitt is the architect of the Mildred Lanes project, which continues to forge new ground in the realm of social engagement. Morgan is a recipient of several prestigious awards and grants, including the Abikonovich Award, Paula Krasner, and Guggenheim, among others. Morgan describes her work as involving a re-examination of the social constructs of community, authorship, division of labor, and our relationship to the environment. She also refers to life as a practice of being, and art and life as something that critically engages every aspect of life. Rather than try to describe Morgan's work further, I am ready to welcome Morgan to this discussion, and I'm going to turn the platform over to her. So welcome, Morgan.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone who's been involved in the Sculpture X symposium. It's an honor to be here, and I'm very curious to go back and listen to all of the webinars that have been occurring over the past few days. I'm just going to jump right into this because I have a lot of images to show you, an extraordinary amount, and I'm going to allow them to just flash to the screen as I talk. I'll talk to some of them, I'll talk over some of them, I'll start meandering off, and I have notes in case I start doing that because I'm a talker. But I'm going to open up my share screen and start a slideshow called Pewitt Projects. Now, this is the first half of the talk will be kind of past work, and the second half of the talk will be about Mildred's Lane. So I'm going to explain to you how Mildred's Lane came into being. Share screen. Is everybody seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, it's just gonna go. You know, the first thing I need to say is that I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I studied painting, sculpture, printmaking, photography, ended up in filmmaking in graduate school. So I've been engaged in the conceptually and material complex field of fine art for my whole life. My mother was a painter, my father was a beekeeper, they were musicians, my father was also a writer. So I had a rich childhood that prepared me for art school. And I ended up doing Mildred's Lane basically because I wanted to live the quality of life that I had in my childhood, that my parents had with their community of artistic friends. But it was a strange course that got me there because right after graduate school, I was immediately thrust into the fashion system. I didn't really intentionally go out and do that at first. It was an accident. It was kind of an epiphany that I had on a field trip in New York when I tagged along with some fashion students to go visit these studios. And I suddenly realized, after asking a curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at Depression era clothes and working people's clothes, because I have an ongoing project and collection of the archaeology of working people's cloth. And she scoffed at me and said, museums don't collect that kind of stuff. We only collect the finest, the things that were kept and preserved. And those things of the poor were turned to quilts or rags or just eventually disintegrated into dust. That blew my mind. And I was immediately off on a course of reinventing and reliving those histories. So I started studying the photography of Walker Evans, Dorothea Lange, Lewis Hines, and others to try to get an understanding of what working people's cloth was and why was it missing from the great language of fashion. So it set off on a conceptual project, like all of my installation projects were during art school and even before. And that led me into understanding. The profound understanding was that fashion's just a symbolic system, and it is used and negotiated and imposed on every person on this planet. That, for me, was a platform to launch into my life. And I have never let go, even though it's, evolved, co-evolved with many people here to here where I am at Mildred's Lane today. But that really was driving me, and still does, really. I was experimenting. I didn't really understand what fashion was, and so you're seeing a bunch of experiments. I was putting rusty wire embedded in the seams of cloth so that the rust would seep through. I was drenching things in beeswax, making things with wax, because I come from 4 generations of beekeepers, and that seemed natural to me. Even though it's a very overused material in contemporary art, I was doing it nonetheless. I raised chickens in the store. I raised butterflies in storefronts. I collaborated with all of my friends on creating incredible series of installations, events. Over the period of about 20 years, I was embedded there. I was frustrated. Each storefront, there were 5 of them in succession, and I was frustrated that I couldn't have the critical engagement that I had in graduate school or in the art world. I couldn't have the same critical engagement in the fashion system. And that eventually, turned me away from it. But nonetheless, I was working and loving it and collaborating. And really, it's where I learned to collaborate. Collaboration and exchange being the core of my practice. Not only do I think it's just important in order to expand your conceptual ideas, but I think it's important socially and politically as well. We have to learn as artists how to work with people in the world. And social engagement was just kind of seeding up over the last 20 or 30 years. But I was still coming out of contextualism, even post-conceptualism, when I did the fashion system period of my career. This is the chicken coop that I lived in Pennsylvania. So all the while that I was in the fashion system, I was going back and forth and living in this little, not this one, the previous one, the Museum of Unfinished Projects, I called it. This is the Schoharie Creek Field Station, another vernacular building that I collaborated with Mark Dion earlier when we first met and started working together. This is another collaboration with Mark called the Ladies Field Club of York, and it was an elaborate costume drama. But the unique thing about this work is that we were using as models all of the contemporary directors and curators of Great Britain during that time. That's Ivana Blaswick, who's the director of Whitechapel. Anyway, that project really made me realize that, as in fashion, photography was a really important aspect of my ongoing work and still is. But there was a point when my business closed because I didn't know what the hell I was doing and reopened with a partner who eventually took over the company, and that's another story. But then what I did was drench the entire business corporation and everything in it in beeswax. So these are images of all of the ephemera, all of the files, the taxes, everything. I drenched in beeswax, and my gallery at the time exhibited that. I think it was 2008. And it was called Wholesale to the Trade Only. The Manhattan Tartan Project was a project during that time too, in the mid-90s, where we were invited, my friend Suzanne Bocanegra and I were constantly chumming together and chumming around, and we were invited to do a project for the Serpentine that was at the Victoria and Albert Museum. The Grafter Shack, you'll see a little bit more of in the Mildred's Lane slideshow, but that was originally a project about my family's history of beekeeping, and it was sited at Wave Hill. There was an exhibition in the gallery in collaboration with my queen breeding sister, Queen Bee, that is, and then a little building. And this is cottage industry. Now you'll start noticing that every one of my projects has a building at the center of it. And this was one of the seminal works that really made it clear that my vernacular architecture interests were never going to go away. Everything I do is at the core. Excuse me, have some water here. And this building was a little abandoned building that I and my collaborators breathed life into. We had an art collection of all of my friends and colleagues. It had a textile collection. It was ephemera that I've been collecting for decades around the needle trades, sewing, women's work. It was truly a little building about women's work and slavery, freed slaves that crossed over in Charleston the river and bought this little building. And that launched me into a whole nother level of conversation around textiles, because it's not only textiles, it's building, clothing, dwelling, living. So every one of the projects, every one of the storefronts I lived. This is another collaboration with Mark Dion, one of my favorite projects, Art In. It's the past and present and future of the nurses' living uniform. There were 5 installations. The slides are going so fast, I'm starting to stumble over my words, excuse me. There were 5 installations in the Fabric Workshop and Museum, Philadelphia. During this time, we were collaborating with old nurses, student nurses, practicing nurses to create the ideal uniform, but we were also dreaming up what would be the future. And ironically, this is the bioterrorist uniform of this period. And then this is the diagnostic. There was the post-apocalyptic, and then the intergalactic nurse. Oh, there's the post-apocalyptic nurse. These are giant iris prints that are schematicizing the patterns and everything. So much of the concepts embedded in these uniforms I still work with today. I call the patterns from this work my blocks, as a designer calls their patterns, basic pattern shapes, their blocks. Again, another study, a deep research around the history of the 3-piece suit that started back in 2001 in conversations with friends, and then it erupted into several installations and projects and museums around the world. I'm even still working on this project. Every year I'm doing something else, talking to the multiple suit. It's at once multiple, multiplied, and multiplicitous. It is this incredible series of patterns, algorithmically derived, that are pulling apart, coming back together again as a suit, as a pair of pants, as a skirt. It's got about 36 pattern pieces. So the 3-piece suit became 36-piece suit. Ridiculous, I know. So we're still playing with these pattern parts. These pattern pieces, I talk about algorithms, and in almost every project, I use algorithms as a tool to break away from the predetermined idea. This is a really good example. This is another little building called the Little Abington Meeting, which was another abandoned building, abandoned by Quakers, and was on the site in this art park. And my collaborators and I started to pull apart the lines of the building and everything in it, and use that information to push back into the project and create a series of patterns that are hanging on the wall there that are absolutely not predetermined, meaning I'm not dreaming this stuff up in my mind first. The algorithm is creating the patterns, and then we're moving it through a series of processes, pulling patterns apart. And patterning is a really big concept in Quakerism. I could talk about that in another lecture. This was a magnificent project at the galleries, the Sullivan Galleries, that were operated and directed by Mary Jane Jacob at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in downtown Chicago in the old Carson Peary Scott building. And as all of my projects also are site sensitive, this was really important that I deal with the department store. It was a department store that died in the 21st century. And I brought it back to life, collecting all of these display cases and creating a game, Department of the Mediation of Collisions. And that was a beautiful project that was up for about 9 months that just kept moving around. So we took this Donald Juddian type grid of department display cases, and the algorithm in the game started moving the cases around with people playing in and out of them. It was really complicated, but it was beautiful. This is kind of an installation in my gallery, Alexander Gray in New York. It was a preamble to Humanufactory. It was a place where I could meet with my collaborators who were working with me. And this project at the Queens Museum was based on one of my favorite childhood stories, The Lorax. And you probably all know that that's about the polluting textile industry. But I didn't mean for this project to be reducible to that critique alone, that it was just for hundreds of years, it's been the most polluting industry on the planet, the textile industry. I really wanted to address Queens as a site where all of the manufacturers were during the 19th and 20th centuries, and it just was dying. All of these factories and all these businesses and industries were dying with the onset of technology. Radical pedagogy. Well, this was a really difficult project. It was in cahoots with MoMA and the Year of the Child, and an installation I did at MoMA called The Living Archive. And I set up an installation at MoMA, but at the same time, I took off on a trip to experiment with what could be possible if we broke away from traditional education. My kid, born in 2000, Gray Rabbit Pewitt, was 12 years old, and we took off on a round the world adventure. And I set up these camps in all of these invitations of museums and art centers and contemporary sites. I set up a camp, and this is called the Sartorius Muscle Table, that I would create at each location. And Rabbit would nap underneath, and I would work as doing woman's work on the top. I was stitching, sewing, cooking. And then at the same time, we were taking public appointments. So the public could walk in to the gallery at any of these locations we were visiting, and they could make an appointment to teach us a lesson in exchange for some mending I might do for them, or cook them some fancy grit recipe, or wherever the conversation took us. I would do some form of exchange that was a woman's work in exchange for a lesson for my kid. You can see there, my kid was getting really upset about this project. He was turning 13, and it was a life hormonal change. And really, the project in some way was so successful, but in other ways it failed because he decided that he didn't want to play anymore. And after about 6 months, we had to end the project. But we got around the world, by golly, and I think it stained him for life. This is my family's bee museum I designed in Hawaii. The family business moved from Georgia to all through many states and then eventually landed in Hawaii. And those photographs in the corner are my family's histories about beekeeping. And my brother and my sister-in-law collaborated in installing that beautiful piece that's still functioning now. This is again in the Sullivan Galleries, where Mary Jane Jacob invited me back to do a project about work styles at Mildred's Lane. So I call this Manufacturing Work Styles. And really it's another archive piece where I'm constantly collaborating and including all of my friends and colleagues in everything that I do. But I imagine this as a hall of complexity. We created a series of portraits called the Labor Portraits of Mildred's Lane. I had done it before in tintype, but then I wanted to be much more stylized in a sense. So I collaborated with Jeffrey Jenkins and Rebecca Purcell, dear friends of mine. We're still working together. And I created this kind of a museum, but strangely, in the museum, there were 16 monitors of footages, little chapters and shorts, as I had been filming and documenting Mildred's Lane 1 year in the life of Mildred's Lane, working with filmmakers, filming a lot of stuff myself, time lapses that were, the camera was up at night going 24 hours, and the gallery was full of those things. So there is an exhibition about Mildred's Lane, and I'm going to shift over to my next part of the slideshow. Give me a second. To Mildred's Lane, where it really comes together in this project. Is it still functioning out there? Give me an okay. Okay. So here's a little bit of mapping just to get you to feel where you are. We're in the middle of about 600 acres of forest. Beautiful indigenous Eastern Pennsylvania, Upper Delaware River Valley forest. This is a building that I designed based on the old barn and chicken coop structure. This is the historic house. These are images of the Steffens family. Mildred Steffens was one of about 12 people who lived in that little house that only had 4 rooms. It's this Mildred archaeology that we're still working on this project, just uncovering the most incredible stuff. We have a dig on the back side of the outhouse behind the building where we're digging down, trying to dig down to the 18th century. But every aspect of this building is thought of as a sculpture. So everybody who's collaborating on this project has been working, coming and going in and out of it for 20 years now. And I think you'll understand the way I work is in real time. So I drag projects across time because I just don't think that art and life should be commodified in that way where it's packaged up and sold as a show in a gallery. I just think that the whole planet is the gallery. The whole landscape is the project. So every little outbuilding, historic outbuilding here has become an artist installation. There are about 4 dozen projects ongoing over the past 20 years and into the future. Most of them are unfinished, and they probably will never be unfinished because there's a life that's infused in them. We're creating little vernacular buildings that fill out the landscape. It was a very poor little farm, and we're just following that conceit and continuing the study of it. So that's why I call it trans-historical, across time. It's across time, and we're layering periods Again, the past, present, and the future. This is the library. So I'm taking you on a little tour. The collections we're rabid collectors. So this was one of the first projects, the tree house, that's now was struck by lightning and has since fallen down. So we're designing a new tree house. And if you remember those other images of the building, you see now what it is. And this is where I'm sitting. I'm sitting in one of those French doors there. Sleeping porch where my Airbnb guests are right now. I'll just let these go past for a minute. But anyway, everything's kind of ended up here. All of my interests, algorithms, collaboration, people. I began really more and more, my work was about building a community, creating a series of events, sometimes like costume dramas, that were about everyday life and taking on every aspect of life here. I got to an age where I was pregnant, going to have a baby, suddenly I had a baby. Suddenly my art career had to be second to raising this child, and I just couldn't let go of that. I instead just embedded my practice into my life, and it was very easy to do because I was already doing it in those storefront installations. I was living in the back room of those installations. I was living the work. Same thing here. I just had a bigger landscape to invite my friends to come and play with me. So what we do throughout sessions are we have lectures with our colleagues. We have invited series of lectures day in and day out, morning, afternoon, and evening. We make these incredible meals. You don't just stop, and there's no service industry. We're all collaborating. And what I call that now is work styles. I had read some Bruce Mao introduction, God, decades ago, and I was really incensed on how he was trying to bring back the term lifestyles from its origins that were so overly commodified. And I just thought, no, creative people, it's all about work. It's about our work. We weave our work through our life. Therefore, it's work styles. And so not having a service industry as a political decision, instead, we all do it. And now I've designed a deck of cards where everybody pulls a card of what work style they do that day, and then they make it into an art project. You go to the refrigerator, you're going to make an installation. If you're cleaning up the kitchen, that's what you're going to be doing. If you're hanging laundry on the laundry line, it's going to be an installation. So it really applies your conceptual toolbox to every aspect of life, everything. I teach people how to collaborate with a vacuum cleaner. You know, it's about, you know, I couldn't understand how there was a moment in the 20th century that somebody, and this is a historical fact and it's written somewhere, decided that they should keep artists in their studio and take their work and put it in a white cube and sell it. And that's the way it should be. Artists in their studio, that's their work time, and then that's the commodified subject. Well, why? Why do we have to go to our studios to be creative? We've been taught this. I mean, there's one quote. I have so many quotes I wanted to say, but here's one by Gilles Deleuze. Our ability to resist control or our submission to it has to be assessed at the level of our every move. That's really profound to me. Yeah. So you see the list of artists and projects that we're carrying on out here in the landscape. It's a real simple set of ingredients. I was a part of think tanks around art and education decades ago, and I was so frustrated that there was kind of this nowhere to it. It would just snap back into a traditional educational set of systems, and I decided that, God damn it, we're just gonna shoot from our hip and make a school of our own. And we teach farm building. We have lectures by amazing colleagues from around the world, musicians, writers, poets. It's very interdisciplinary, and we're constantly one-upping each other in how do we take our art practice out of the studio and slather it across this landscape. It's a 24/7 job being an artist, being a creative. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer to me. I think I grew up this way, and I think that I've had the best life I could have possibly imagined. We learn everything. We take on everything: wilding, foraging, bread making, pasta making. We take on the kitchen refrigerator, the boiler room, any place, the quarry. We'll turn it into an installation. The landscape, constantly changing. We have a set of tools, benches, tables, all kinds of tables, all kinds of dishware, and we just reinvent it every day. We have what we call social Saturdays, which is where we invite the public in during our sessions. Our sessions can be, they're topic driven, usually with visiting artists. The artists are 4 to 1 usually, especially now in COVID. We're going forward, they're going to be much smaller, much more intensive, with friends and colleagues, with just a small group of fellows. And we just experiment with the world. Now we have a storefront in the local Narrowsburg and a studio since 2010. So very early on, for a decade, we've been a part of the community here, and we do things for free in the open community. So anybody can walk into the storefront and be involved with an exhibition, a workshop, a lecture. We are involved with all of our other retail neighbors, doing festivals, doing exhibitions, and these are just a few of those at what we call the Mildred Complexity, which is the public face of Mildred's Lane. This is some remnants from Mildred archaeology. For the last couple of years, we were given a new space in a nearby village where I installed it really simply with plywood because I knew we were going to be there. It was an itinerant space. And we did 4 exhibitions there with all the creatures who swarm around topics at Mildred's Lane. And each person would throw in a topic, and we would then collaborate and create an installation around the topic. So they seem like a singular person's installation, but they're really about 2 to 3 dozen artists that are a part of those installations. These are the labor portraits: cabinet minister, peregrinator, fire master, master of applied complexity. So you see, we're reassembling the terms to suit our own sets of labor. Officer of complexity. Digestion choreographer. A chef is singular, but a digestion choreographer is a collective. Ministry of comfort. Land steward. And these roles are constantly changing. Minister of serial materialism. Master Hushris. Department of Interstitiaries is the main studio in town. It's a little sewing factory. And I am the ambassador of entanglement. And there are hundreds of people who've helped build this site. Dozens of people who are working here ongoing. And it's a place, it's an alternative place to educate yourself in contemporary artistic practices. Now, to sum it all up, I could just say, I'm interested in new modes of being in the world. Okay, I got to stop that. Sorry, I'll just let it go. And that's evoking social and political entanglement that questions, one, primarily our relations to the environment for the future. Two, our relationships with each other. We got to get better at that. Three, systems of labor. We've got to deal with the way we work together. Four, forms of dwelling, addressing comfort, and what does that mean in the 21st century? Five, clothing apparatuses or design apparatuses. Six, and most importantly, inventive and creative domesticating. And all of that sums up for me ethics of our comportment. Ethics of comportment. That's all. It's a working, living, researching life strategy, co-evolving a rigorous engagement with every aspect of life called work styles. So you see, being is the practice at Mildred's Lane. Thank you very much. I'll just figure that out in just a second.
Thank you. Mary Elizabeth, you want to come on?
Yes, thank you, Morgan. Lots to think about, lots to see.
Now, I'm going to just go ahead and ask you a question.
Yeah.
Okay? So thank you. I've noticed on your site, you have workshops and residence opportunities and things like that. And some of them have a project laid out.
Yeah.
Is that determined in advance of the workshop, and who does that? If there's this collaboration, is that collaboration taken?
Well, the way it's functioning, I mean, it all emerges out of conversations over decades. So, for instance, the Alchemist Shack was a conversation that we had with a dear friend and colleague, artist Robert Williams in England, Lancaster. And we decided that the site needed an alchemy shack. And we wanted to study the history of alchemy. So in the beginning, it was a collaboration between the three of us, but Robert Williams really took it over and has been coming back every other year or every third year over the last 23 years we've been here now. And we've slowly been building this little curiosity cabinet that's surrounding the history of alchemy. So he curates a series of lecturers and friends and colleagues that come from all over the world and brings them along. And then the work that they do with the handful of fellows that are there for that session during that time, who've signed up or have been sent from universities or art schools, which is the way we work, is we try to get the schools to support the fellows or the faculty or classes that come. But then, so that Alchemist Shack, essentially, starting back in 1998, has co-evolved with dozens of people who have worked around it, installed it. It's still being installed. But you can now live in it and sleep in it, because that was one of the odd rules that we kept so that we could house everybody, was that each installation had to have a really comfortable bed to sleep in. So they're camps. A lot of them have no electricity, but they're installations. You saw them in the images, yeah.
Right.
So the collaborative process kind of is, again, it's just happens to be who's here during that time, but they are privy to making the decisions that are emerging out of that stage or phase of that project. So there are some projects that are ongoing, and we've been planning for decades and building out slowly. There are projects still on the list. We don't have any money, so we can't really make those things until we are able to. And it's usually me applying for grants as an artist, because I've been working through this site as a project of mine, but part of my practice, if it's complex, is about collaborating with people. So all of those artists are embedded here. And another further thing, we just formed into a nonprofit corporation. I don't think we're going to go for the 501c3 for a lot of reasons. They're just hairy and kind of a racket, I think, but that maybe sets us up to apply for grants so that we can fund artists and projects for the future. Every one of those people has been coming as a generosity project. All of the money that's supported by individuals or students or schools goes into the operating costs, the food, the event,
Right.
materials and supplies. Nobody gets paid. I don't get paid.
Right.
I have a job that I'm a gig worker artist, but I have a job at Mildred's Lane as the ambassador of entanglement, but I've never gotten paid for 20 years. God damn it. So this COVID thing, it's just the way I've been living for that long anyway. So, but I'm scrappy and creative, and I recycle, reuse, and adaptively remake everything.
So let me ask you another question.
Yeah.
Excuse me for interrupting, but you mentioned before this session that you have some guests there, like a B&B.
Airbnb is saving me right now. Yeah,
Okay.
saving.
I was just wondering, do they have to like clean the, work in the kitchen and everything, or
No, but I'm so I'm so good about work styles. I just present them with all of their tools, and they maintain them.
Okay.
So especially now in COVID, so that they have all of their accoutrement and glasses and napkins and cloths, and they can do whatever they want.
Great.
But yes, I do service I do clean up after them. But if they were in a session, they would be doing it. And a lot of them do anyway. I have a note from the comportment manual, and some of them read it, and then they see that it's a participatory place. And so they take their sheets off and bring them in, but they're not going to wash them.
Right. So we do have a question here that I want to get to, but I want to follow up a little bit on what you were mentioning about the duration and the length of some of these projects.
Yeah.
And so do you ever run into people that just say, we want to make a radical change? Or is there some sense that there needs to be some like continuity from the original idea as it manifests itself to some maybe never being concluded?
I haven't bumped into that yet.
Okay.
But you know, I invite the criticism openly. I share everything. I mean, it's pretty challenging to do. Imagine you inviting a bunch of artists into your household and redecorate it and redesign it and move it around. First thing I do for orientation is I pretty much take them into the kitchen laboratory and I say, we take everything off the shelves and I say, okay, now install it.
Yeah.
And they install it so that they know where everything is.
Okay.
They know how to use it. So I basically give over this whole vessel as the main house. I give over to a session, if it's a longer session especially, and I have them rearrange the whole place.
Mary Elizabeth, did you want to?
Yeah, you've started to address one of my initial questions, Morgan, which was to talk a little bit about your role, and you've chosen the terms ambassador and host, but also I'm also hearing facilitator. I'm hearing that you're modeling actions and perhaps making provocations or invitations, as you've just explained. And I'm interested in the relationship between your role or your roles as you take them on, as you interact and set the tone for an experience, and the language that you have adopted related to whole schooling and what you've talked about emergent curriculum, and what is emergent when relationships build between people and ideas are invented and there are explorations. Could you talk a little bit about your role as ambassador and your interest in some of the metaphors and language of whole schooling and emergent curriculum?
Well, yeah, it's the terminology. I like that Deleuze quote. I think addressing the terminology first is so important to me, because if I called myself an artist, that's one thing. Okay, I'm an artist. I'm a creative thinker. I don't even like to say artist anymore because it kind of immediately connotes a whole thing in your mind, and whatever walk of life you come from, you're going to project what that is. Oh, you're a painter in the studio. Well, you know, I hate that chit chat on an airplane because I just took the 3-letter word out. It's more like I'm in this post-creative place. That's a term that I'm trying out. I'm not sure if it's going to work, post-creative, but I've been toying with it in my writing. But ambassador is different from artist. I mean, I'm collaborating. I'm getting tangled up with a bunch of characters. I'm also going out to the edge of my comfort zone as an artist. So what am I, a curator? Maybe. Well, that is another projection that people are going to like slather on. Curator? Oh, it's your project. Oh, director? Am I director? I'm directing. I'm setting up programming. I'm an administrator. I'm a secretary. I'm the house cleaner. I'm the maid. I'm all of these things. Well, when you think about it, that's woman's work. That's the history of woman's work. And I've pulled that apart into 17 labors. So ultimately, there's 17 labor portraits. That was only the first part of your question, right? The terminology, back to that. So the emergent curriculum, ambassador of entanglement, seemed fitting. I remember when I first tried it out, 20 years ago, and a couple of my friends were like, what? You're an ambassador? Because they took it personally, like, was I ambassadoring them? I wasn't allowed to do that as an artist, but if I was called my curator, I would be allowed to do so, right? So immediately see I'm toying with the way people project their own notions of what life is onto any given situation or person. So the emergent part of it is another theoretical term, that it's moving out of a system that's not predetermined, not thought of ahead of time. Okay, so we thought of the alchemy shack, but we don't really know what it's going to look like. Well, actually, I did make a drawing, a sketch, as many of my little sketches of buildings here, and in order to get a permit from the township, but it doesn't really look like that sketch. It was just my early idea of like what was inspiring it. But that is not predetermining it, because I've allowed for that to change and shift and evolve, co-evolve with all of our colleagues and students who have worked on that building over the years. And it's still not done. But it's a building that's going to be here for hundreds of years. It's just such a solid little building. I don't know, did I answer all aspects of that question? That was a complicated question.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the emergence, especially if we think about events as they unfold in the space of Mildred's Lane with particular objects and particular people and particular ideas as they come together, really speaks to this, this idea that things are in the making, and that the objects and the ideas are not stagnant. And so I think that's really interesting from the perspective of what's happening in community.
You know, that's really important. That was another thing that we didn't want to repeat what's already been done. Okay, Storm King has the static giant sculpture in the landscape that's supposed to be what you set your eyes upon. But here, we're collaborating with the land. We're collaborating with the animals and all of the natural parts to it. So it's not static, it's constantly in motion. We didn't want anything that could be static. That was another reason for having a bed in an installation, because someone has to be able to live that installation. And in a way, that's where I really strongly come in, because all of my work has been about that for my whole life. So even as a child. So
Morgan, were you referencing anything? There was a comment here in the chat about a reference to Black Mountain College. Were you looking at any outside?
Oh yeah, interesting. Black Mountain. I'm actually addressing that in my book too, because there was a great exhibition by Helen Molesworth that was traveling around a few years ago. I don't know if it's still traveling around, about Black Mountain. And interestingly, there are some crossovers in that, because anytime you step out and try to do something alternative in education, you know, people are gonna be interested. But Nato Thompson right now is starting a new alternative school for artists during this age of COVID, especially. Black Mountain is so different because it essentially was in a time and an age where it was all about, I don't want to offend anybody, the old white artist, the old white guy making work, and then having a set of students that he was teaching and lecturing to and working on a project, while the women were still in the kitchen making the food, you know, and there are laborers in the field, in the garden, doing the garden. It wasn't permaculture like this place is. It wasn't about systems thinking like this is, or as Jack Burnham writes about in the late 60s, systems aesthetics. So that's the real difference here, is that it's not relegated again to the project. It's the whole way we live together. Right. And actually, to tell you the truth, I've been learning how to do this year after year. I haven't been so great at it. It's taken me a long time to understand my own terminology in a way and really make it work as systems aesthetics.
So there was another question, and you might have answered some of this, but there's multiple points to this question. So it's how can people who are interested get involved. Is there a cost to attend Mildred's Lane? Do the visitors stay on site? What happens to the items after the various exhibits that you have? And I know they're around the world. Do they all return back to the source? Or?
They come back into Mildred's Lane.
Yeah.
Sometimes I had, like the whole schooling, I had to just leave behind the encampments and a lot of that ephemera, all of that stuff, because we were moving around and we had to carry a light. But you see in my work, I'm just a collector. I've been collecting. Mark too. We're both collectors, and our installations are all about collecting as much as they are about whatever topic or context that we're working within. Mildred's Lane does cost. I calibrated that it costs about $150 a day to live and eat and work together here, which is a cost. So that's not counting, nobody gets paid. So it's just taking an account of what those costs kind of spread out over a year. Mm-hmm. $150 a day, which is about $1,000 a week. So you're paying $1,000 a week, but we're trying to set up a way so that students are either getting scholarships from Mildred's Lane, or they're getting an institution that's supporting them, a graduate program, for instance, sends students to Skowhegan or, you know, any of Acre or any of these residencies around the world, or taking them to Europe. So there are those scholarship monies that where most of the institutions are supporting a fellow to come for 1 to 3 weeks, sometimes longer. And out of those fellows, they'll come for sessions, and then I'll collect people who have a deeper interest on staying on here. Then they get a stipend and they work as assistants at Mildred's Lane, because there's a plethora of things that have to be done year round just to keep this place alive and growing. So I always have 1 or 2 art assistants engaged year round. Or, you know, people are swanning in through a month. Like there's a fellow coming in October who's going to be working on a project around this giant rusty pile of amazing stuff that we want to do something with. So he's going to be collaborating with me on that project, the rust pile. And there's so many projects you can, when a fellow comes year round, they can choose what they're interested in working on. Last month we had a fellow who just tackled the garden project, which kind of died when the groundhog family moved in and ate everything and destroyed it. And she went in and just completely pulled it apart. And now we have a couple coming in October who are collaborating on the new design of a pollinating garden. We have an apiary, and there are dozens of projects. But it's just we take one thing at a time. Whomever's interested in that given project, then we'll swarm people around it, invite guest artists to come in to collaborate. That's what's emergent about it. It's hard to plan ahead that way. But there's already now a baseline of projects that we already know that they're going. And we're building a cultural site here. So I'm in the process of rezoning with the township board. And once we do that, I don't know, I hope it's a game changer and we can get some grants and really make this happen. I'm putting a couple of boards together, advisory boards and fundraising boards. And it's now gotten to a level where it's a teenager that's kind of grown up.
There's a question, what do your neighbors think of your project?
Well, that's really a fun question. I could talk a long time about that. I'll try not to. most of them are pretty great with it, but they're so far away. I mean, they're a half a mile to a mile away. So we're in the middle of the woods here. Our neighbors are these animals, damn groundhogs, the deer, the bear. The bear destroyed the bee yard this spring. I mean, banged through an expanded metal wall, broke into the bee yard, ate the bees, destroyed everything, tried to drag one of my brother's bee sculptures into the woods like he was an art thief. I mean, we have to deal with those neighbors constantly, and you know, they're domineering. But then I have a couple of hunter neighbors. They want in here to hunt, and one of them is a little hostile. And another neighbor is just not interested. He's a realtor. You know, I could tell you stories.
So how do you, the exhibitions, I noticed that some of the slides you showed, some of those exhibitions were really very recent. So how are you, are you being approached by galleries, museums, to maybe talk a little bit about that?
You know, interestingly,
it's a collaborative thing.
It's so hairy, and I've gotten a little bit of a reputation for bringing the whole world with me. And I think I kind of might have put my career out a little bit, because now everybody identifies me with Mildred's Lane. And I'm hoping to, I'm searching for an executive ambassador of entanglement, that will step in and collaborate and help. I'm searching for another entity to come in and help, so that I can actually step back a little bit as an artist and start applying all of this knowledge that I've learned in doing this experimental living project. It's eating away at my soul that I'm not able to, get off the administrative horse of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure we all have that a little bit, right? As artists in their, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. And Morgan, I just want to tell you how I've been thinking a lot about Mildred's Lane in anticipation of our talk tonight, and reviewing your work and thinking about my own role in daily life, creative work, the work of a mother, the work of a creative and an artist and an educator and administrator, and all of these roles. And I think that this awareness of the embeddedness of work and place is on people's mind because of what is being called the stay-at-home time with the pandemic context. And yet your work, you've been doing this
I've been doing
prior, this is not part of a pandemic context. And yet it seems so important to me to talk about that especially as a person personally who has sometimes in my recent past left the home to go do something that felt very important to me. And so would you be interested in talking a little bit about how you think Mildred's Lane is different now that the pandemic context includes people's understanding of working from home?
Well, it's different here at Mildred's Lane right now. You saw all those images full of life and dozens of people around. Right now, it's really quiet. There's not. I can't have dozens of people here. We had one session that was an experiment this summer called Marks for Cats with Caroline Woolard and Lee Claire LeBerge, who are also annual. They're always doing a session every year. They always come, throughout the year as well. And it was different. We could only have about a dozen people here, and we can socially distance even, in this wild landscape very easily. I just gave people a basket of their tools, their household tools, and they had to set their own tables, and they could check out other ingredients like teacups and saucers or plates. They could check out different things from our archive of stuff, and they could set their own table, and they could, you know, serve their own food and then wash their own dishes, and then they would either keep those tools with them in their installation dwelling, or they would turn them in and get some others. So we created a bunch of new games around the COVID thing. And it was successful. It was really great. Everybody was really gratified, and I see a way forward next year that it just is going to have to be more spread out in the year. So I'll do things year round now. I mean,
That really is different from the sort of structure you had before, where everybody was collaborating. And
but also I was raising a kid. I'm a single parent raising a kid. And so it wasn't so conducive to have that ongoing year round.
mm-hmm.
But now it is. He's in his sophomore year at college. Actually, he's online now. He can't go on campus right now, but he's different. So he's more tolerant. And I am taking in artists as residents, but they're also playing out work styles with us. So no matter what we're working on, I mean, I'm working on a project all the time. I don't have a Sunday or Friday evening. I'm working Friday evening tonight, you know. I'm always working and applying my creative toolbox.
So I just wanted to mention that, you know, I was reading one of your zines where you have something about commodity, and you're talking about, like, when you go grocery shopping, thinking about everything you buy, and you take it out of the package.
Yeah.
And you repackage it in your own containers. Could you talk about that a little bit? Just thought that was kind of interesting.
That's another thing about the resistance, the level of resistance, that I just think that there's so much in our day-to-day lives that's telling us how to do something, you know, and I don't want a package yelling at me with all of their color and weird fonts and everything, telling me what to do with that material. I might want to glue those black-eyed peas to a canvas. I don't want them to tell me what I want to do with them. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's that little bit of resistance that we have to critically engage with in every minute of our lives. You know, it's constantly around us.
True. So there was a question at one point you had brought up, excuse me, getting permits to build buildings. You have how many, like 17 or so buildings, or?
I forgot. I have to count again.
I can't remember, but I read somewhere it seemed like a lot. So I myself was curious about zoning, permits, and there was a question that says, do you have local political support, which I'm assuming sort of means in the zoning part of all of this.
I have become very good friends with my zoning officer.
Educational or residential?
No, right now it's residential. I've become very good friends. I've been talking to my zoning officer for years about this, and he's got a whole collection of my little hand-drawn, you know, penciled architecture at the county there, Wayne County, Damascus Township, and he's come to understand Mildred's Lane, and he's about to come do a visit this month or early next month in the coming weeks, where he really sees everything. Mm-hmm. I kind of went to him last fall because they were rezoning and shutting Airbnbers down, and I said, you can't do this. I run a school, you know, and he's helping me come up with a new zoning, a new kind of slot to put me in. So he's coming over, and we're going to go through everything. He's going to see everything, and he's going to find all the violations, even the stairway in my house is a sculpture. It's not a stair, you know? So I have to just grit my teeth and know that I'm going to have to go through a little bit of trouble with my county for a little while, but I'll work through it. It'll be all good in the end. Everything here is an art project, so it kind of falls off the table of categories for them. So I have to educate.
Right.
I'll have to give him a presentation like this when he comes so that he understands what's going on.
Good luck.
But I got
Good luck, Morgan.
I've got to do it though, because I got to think of the future of Mildred's Lane, you know? I'm getting old. I got to set it up so everybody else can use this toolbox.
That reminds me, Morgan, of I was thinking of asking you this prior to your talk, and I had decided against it, but then you brought it up in your slides, or just recently, about the relationship between the retail and the storefront extension of your work, and the tension or the issues related to making the work nonprofit and working with a 501c3 status. And I'm asking this because I think there are a lot of creatives who are thinking about how to make it and how to do it and what are the mechanisms. So we're talking about zoning and we're talking about these issues. Do you have any more insights into, especially with the theoretical background that you're bringing in, the concepts of this, questioning the commodity and interest in labor, and what does this do in the mechanics of the retail and the nonprofit?
Well, it was one of the very early sessions here over a decade ago called Retail 21st Century, because I've been playing around with that stuff my whole adult career. And what it requires, first of all, I teach this stuff, storefront practices in the social realm. It's my platform. I love it. I love to talk about it. When I swan in and teach at schools and lecture, I do workshops around it, because it is an amazing way for an artist to take independently the future of their career. Storefront studios, where you can actually open the door and engage the public and do things in your storefront. It's what I was doing. I wasn't really a fashion designer. I was an installation artist, but I could sell clothes. I had a knack for making clothes that people wanted that could support my practice. So that was kind of, and I was able to contextualize the clothing project to project to project, which the fashion industry is really fun to play with that in that way, because designers work very thematically, and they just didn't take it as far as I did, where it was about the installation, it's about the store place, it's about the store. It works in reverse. The designer would predetermine what they're going to do, forecasted by giant corporate mechanisms, 5 years in advance. They're already thinking about that because it's called capitalism. But in my stores, it's important for a storefront practitioner to constantly be applying your critical toolbox, constantly critically engaging with what it is you're trying to do and allow it to emerge in an instant. So I could make decisions. And so it was in reverse. A designer designs and then creates an environment or chooses a store to sell it in. But what I would do is I would create the storefront and take short-term leases. They were like pop-up shops. 40 years ago, I was doing this before that term. And I would create my series of installations where the designs would emerge out of the installations. So I was working like an artist, wasn't working like a designer. I was an installation artist where clothing and textiles became part of the materiality of that storefront practice. So you could do that with anything. Any artist could do that with whatever they're working in, metal, ceramics, printmaking, you know, ideas. You can have a storefront of ideas for sale. I mean, but don't become a capitalist. Now, this was a mistake I made, and that's why I'm a poor artist today. But I have a rich life. I don't feel like that's what I needed. Money wasn't the thing I was interested in. It was the culture, the dynamics, the ideas. I grew up in a family where our family motto was on our bulletin board. It was, as long as you're green, you grow. But when you think you're ripe, you're rot.
Morgan, I love that quote. We have about 10 minutes, and there is one other kind of a question, but there was this sort of a, in a way, going on with this idea of the zoning process, and you're, you know,
Yeah.
there's kind of brought up the idea of documenting you negotiating with this person that comes to your property. But I want to just let everybody know we have maybe about 10 minutes before this session scheduled to end. If you have a question, get it up on the chat or the Q&A. And if you want to field that, I don't know if you want to respond to that somehow. Feel free. Anything
And we
else?
had a comment, and I echo this too, that I love the resistance and opposition to having the commercial labels invading your home space. It's true that there's such a barrage of imagery that just comes in on a packaging label.
God, it's like commercial, you know. When I'm watching a movie on cable or the news, I just have a setup where I click away as soon as a commercial comes on. I just have to look away. You have to train yourself to resist. Stop thinking about it. Stop hearing about it. It's because it's just insidious.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. But,
So
you know,
Morgan, what are you excited about next? What's your big next?
well, oh, wow. Well, what is next? I think just what I'm talking about in this growing up phase of Mildred's Lane, I'm excited to talk. I've got a few meetings set up with friends that talk about how to slip back into the shadows a little bit more, so I can actually loosen up my mind for other creative thinking. I always have something going on, but like I'm working on a project for Hancock Shaker Village. It got postponed because of COVID. I'm working on a little vernacular structure for that site, and I'm very excited about that because it's also a memorial or a monument to the women in my family who've taught me so much. My sister, who's now dead, my mother, who's aging, she's 92, my grandmother, her mother, and her mother, whom I'm named after. And it's an interesting project. So, I mean, as far as research, that's really what I've been reading a lot about is utopian studies and Shakerism, Shakers, and things like that. But I think it's really exciting to see kind of a place that Mildred's Lane can go on to. And I have been designing some architecture that can be discreetly smattered into the forest here. So thinking about ways I can landscape the place, and that's one of the reasons why the zoning officer is coming, because I've been talking to him about this.
So Morgan, if you slip into the shadows, you're going to have to change your title.
Well, I know, but somebody else will be the ambassador of entanglement. I'll just be another one of the animals here.
So we are running close to our allotted time on this site. So any closing comments?
Well, I just want to thank y'all for allowing me to talk about this project and actually to reflect on some of my older projects that they seem so far away now. and I haven't talked to them for a while. But I just want to thank you. Thank y'all so much for being interested. And those of you who stuck around throughout the whole thing, thank you very much. Come visit Mildred's Lane.
We would love to come and visit Mildred's Lane.
Yeah.
I would like to
said,
thank you for joining us tonight. It was very interesting. And when I was started to research your work, I just found it very complex, really interwoven into everything. So I'm glad that we had you here tonight to talk about it. Mary Elizabeth, thank you for joining in tonight.
Yes, thank you.
I would just like to thank again everybody that did join us tonight, and remind people that we do have a session, several sessions tomorrow. I think I read them off at the beginning of this, but if you give me 1 second, I'll pull this up. We have, I know starting 10 o'clock, Patty Beachley, she's going to be talking about planning. Everybody is invited to join that and join in that discussion. We have a session at Gendered Spaces, I think at 2 o'clock, Art and Agency 2 at 4 o'clock, and then a closing remarks again by Patty Beachley at 5:30. So please join in tomorrow, full day. And if there's nothing else, I'm going to close this off. We have like just 1 or 2 minutes. Anybody?
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Morgan, and thanks to each of the participants for your questions and for being here tonight.
Am I supposed to just say goodbye to y'all too now and sign off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Morgan, it was enjoyable.
All right. I'll follow up with emails to everybody. Thank you.
Great. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.